Hola, SAP developers. Welcome to the last session of the day of the TOEFL 2024 integration track. Before we start, please know that you can drop us your questions on the chat window. We'll be monitoring them and we will answer your questions there. We also have a special Q&A section at the end of the session. So, today we have two amazing speakers who are unfortunate enough to be my work colleagues. So we have Davey Odom, who talked about SAP Event Broker at the last year's the Torfest, and also David Kunz, who has also been a speaker at the Torfest. And well, he needs no introduction, as you all know him as part of the CAP team at SAP, right? And I bet many of you are keen on learning how you can easily connect a CAP service with what's now known as SAP Cloud Application Event Hub. So, without any further delay, hola, Davey and David, over to you guys.
Thanks, Antonio. So as said, my name is Davey Odom. I work as the lead for this SAP Cloud Application Event Hub. And again, don't be confused. This is a new name for the old thing, which used to be called the SAP Event Broker for SAP Cloud Applications. The rename is kind of hot off the presses. This just happened a little over a week ago. So bear with us as we switch to this new name here. And today, as Antonio said, we're going to be talking about how you can consume some business events from an SAP Cloud application inside of a CAP extension, which you're building and deploying on BTP. So without further ado, let's talk about the agenda here. We're basically splitting this into two parts today. I'm going to take about half the time and go through these first two topics, which is more of the slides and discussion, where I'll talk through SAP's event-driven architecture technology strategy as a whole, with a specific focus on this SAP Cloud Application Event Hub. Explain to you how all the pieces fit together and why, and then we'll spend a little bit of time talking about clean core and event-driven extensions and the cloud application programming model, and introduce a few of the concepts and what it means to use this SAP Cloud Application Event Hub. From there, I'll hand it off to David, who will go through a hands-on demo, show you all these things in practice. And then, as Antonio said, we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So first, let's talk about SAP's event-driven architecture technology strategy. As probably most people are familiar with here, there's a handful of different offerings. So I'll talk through this and explain it a little bit. But before we dive into that, we first need to level set here, make sure we have the same understanding of events and event-driven architecture as a whole. So yeah, probably this is things most of you know, so bear with me, we won't spend too long here. So first of all, what is an event? Well, we have an occurrence out there in the real world. This is simply something happening, a kind of statement of fact. So, and as an example here in a software context, an order was placed. So what is the actual event, moving from occurrence to event? So if we take that statement of fact and then we wrap it in some context, and we put it into a kind of form or format where we can process it and do things with it, then we have what we refer to as an event. So here in this example, we have the order was placed, but not only was an order placed, it was placed by tenant XYZ of some system at a particular time, and it probably has some order ID associated and so on. So I'll just show you a quick example here. This example, we see a JSON object, and this happens to be in a cloud event format. Cloud events are an interoperable open source standard, which SAP has adopted and many others have as well. I'll mention it again later, but we can see in this object that we have an event type. This is an S4 purchase order created event type. We see the source, that this came from an S4 system, and in particular, tenant XYZ. We see the time it happened. These are all header attributes, carrying some context. And then we see the data object itself, where in this case, we just have a purchase order ID. Other events can have lots more content in the payload. This is just one example. So now that we have these events, how do we pull them together, turn it into a coherent architecture? So that's where event-driven architecture steps in. And this is a well-known, not a new topic out there in the software world. So I'm just highlighting a couple of key points. There's lots of other materials you can go out and reference to learn more here. So first of all, events are used to communicate between decoupled services or systems. This decoupling is a key aspect of an event-driven architecture. We're not talking about a web of point-to-point connections or synchronous connections. This decoupling is happening both through asynchronicity and then also not having point-to-point, but having a kind of hub approach typically in between the various systems. So second here, events aren't sent with a specific destination, rather interested consumers subscribe to the events. So underneath this statement is basically saying this is a pub-sub communication paradigm, which carries with it that, the producer of an event doesn't need to know anything about all the downstream consumers when it produces the event. It's just a statement of fact as to what happened again, and then interested consumers can subscribe from there. And then the third key characteristic is that an intermediary is typically used between the event producers and event consumers, or in fact, often a series of intermediaries. So these intermediaries support the asynchronous nature of the communication, they support the decoupling, and they bring a lot of qualities to these architectures, which we'll talk about in the benefits shortly afterwards. Yeah, so here, why do we care about this? This is an architecture, so logically it makes sense, pretty easy to understand, but why do we care about it and why is it interesting? So I just listed a few key points, and there's lots of others here as well. So first one is that businesses move in real time. So this makes it a natural fit for this kind of event-driven architecture, which is a near real time, something happens, something responds, kind of integration pattern. So, business in the real world typically isn't waiting for polling intervals. It's not waiting for timing of batch jobs. Rather, something is happening and then immediately something is happening in response to that. So this is a natural fit here. Second one is a big one. These decoupled systems are more resilient. So the benefits coming from the intermediary as well as from this pub-sub style of communication. So just an example here, if you have an event consumer out there, that event consumer has some major problems, maybe even a significant outage, and is down for a long period of time, with an event-driven architecture and usage of this intermediary, the event producer is unaffected. It continues business as normal. It sends out events saying what's happening, inside of its boundaries, and carries on that without being negatively impacted from that consumer outage. The consumer can come back online later. It can pick up where it was, start consuming the events, come back to a reasonable state, and everything moves along happily. So that's one example of the resiliency here. The next one is about breaking down silos and cross-vendor boundaries. So a similar benefit here to well-documented APIs or standard APIs. You can think of events as a kind of asynchronous API here. And especially when we couple that with this open standard of cloud events, these events don't have to only be used inside of one closed ecosystem. They can really be used out there anywhere. So we see lots of scenarios which are spanning vendor boundaries, spanning line of business boundaries inside of a large organization, and so on. Next, we have agility. So this is related to the pub-sub model, and already briefly mentioned. An event producer is unaffected by the consumers. So new business cases can come about, new requirements. You can add new consumers, new event consumers, without any impact on the event producing system. This also allows you to keep all of your development and deployment life cycles independent between all these different participants. You have this stable asynchronous contract between all of them. Last point on this page is about absorbing spikes in traffic, another kind of aspect of the resiliency, but here you can think about The typical example, Black Friday with a commerce system. You may have a massive spike in orders placed, and it may not be a reasonable expectation that every downstream consumer can handle that spike in near real time. You don't want to do some accidental denial of service style attacks on those consumers and crash them. So these intermediaries are capable of absorbing those spikes in traffic and then letting slower consumers downstream handle at their own pace without disruption. In the boxes on the right here, I put links to a couple of other recent presentations for some more insight. So for a deeper dive on EDA, which is the short for event-driven architecture, you can see this tech ed presentation about real-time business insights. And if you want to learn more about this CNCF cloud events specification, I referenced another DevToberfest talk that happened a bit over a week ago, I think. Both of those are great, and I would recommend watching. So from there, now we have kind of the high level covered. Let's talk about SAP specifics. So here's a diagram showing some of the key pillars of SAP's event-driven architecture technology strategy. We'll start here with the SAP Cloud in the middle. So this SAP Cloud Applications is including S/4HANA Cloud, public and private, lots of other SAP Cloud applications, and SAP BTP applications. So those can be built and deployed by customers, by partners, or by SAP itself. And all of these things inside of SAP Cloud, we have connected with these pink lines to the SAP Cloud Application Event Hub. So this, as we say on the right, it provides coherent access to the events of the SAP Cloud applications for simple consumption. Moving out then beyond SAP Cloud, we see on the left third-party cloud applications. We see on the right on-premise private landscapes, which include SAP on-premise applications like S/4HANA on-premise or ECC, but also include third-party applications and all manner of other on-premise infrastructures. So we can take all of these disparate sources and pull them down together into this SAP Integration Suite Advanced Event Mesh. So here, as we say on the right, this is a fully distributed multi-broker event mesh to distribute, manage, and monitor events across the broad landscapes. So what I want to highlight here is we have these two different things. They're serving different purposes, but they're built there. They're put in place to interoperate. And if you want to take a deeper look into event sources for Advanced Event Mesh, there was a talk which actually happened right before this one, but I have the link here about various event sources, SAP event sources for Advanced Event Mesh, which includes the SAP Cloud Application Event Hub. Yeah, so if you're looking in the SAP Cloud context, the good starting place to look is this SAP Cloud Application Event Hub. If you're expanding to full enterprise-wide use cases, then typically people are starting to look at Advanced Event Mesh. And just to mention as well here, we also have the event mesh capability of Integration Suite and the former standalone event mesh. Things I'm not going to really cover in this talk today, but they serve a similar function as the advanced event mesh here. You're getting some message broker or event broker, which you can work with. They just do it at a much smaller scale with a much more limited feature set. But, functionally, roughly, you can think of them as serving similar purposes. So we'll dive a little bit deeper here into the SAP Cloud part of the story. So here we see a few notable SAP Cloud applications already connected to the SAP Cloud Application Event Hub. So S/4HANA Cloud and SAP SuccessFactors, as well as other SAP Cloud applications. To be specific with S/4HANA Cloud, this is the S/4HANA Cloud Public Cloud Edition, which is already connected. The private cloud edition connection is coming quite soon here. And there's an asterisk with SuccessFactors to note that SuccessFactors usage is in an early adopter care program right now, but will be going GA next year. So then let's start with scenario number 1 here. And this is really the focus of the talk today and the focus of the demo we'll see in a little while. So customer and partner extension applications built on SAP BTP can leverage this SAP Cloud Application Event Hub to have access to the events from the SAP business applications. So these extensions are built in support of clean core initiatives and other such motivations for building extensions. Moving on from there, we have these scenarios 2 and 3, which aren't the focus today, but yeah, just so you know they're there. In scenario number 2, we have some pre-built event-based integrations between SAP Cloud applications. So these are, integration content, which SAP is shipping and making available to you as a customer. You still have control. You turn these on, enable them, but it's a simple enablement, and then you can add some additional business context on top. So this is letting you start to dive into the benefits of event-driven architectures for these SAP Cloud to SAP Cloud scenarios. And then number 3 at the bottom here, as mentioned before, when you want to take events from an SAP Cloud context and move them out into the rest of the world, third-party or on-prem scenarios, there we have various offerings from the integration suite to support you. So on the right, we have cloud integration capability of SAP Integration Suite. So this is already out there and available for usage, this style of integration. So you can take some events from SAP Cloud applications and feed them into iFlows, where you do all the well-known kind of standard mediation processes of cloud integration, leverage the rich libraries of transformations and third-party adapters and so on, but trigger those iFlows based on events from SAP Cloud applications using this Event Hub. And then on the left, as mentioned, you can also funnel the events out from an SAP Cloud context into event brokers of the advanced event mesh, and then do anything you like from there. And there's a double asterisk just to note for you that this advanced event mesh channel isn't GA as of today, but it's coming very, very soon as well. So what I wanted to spend a minute after this is to dive a little bit deeper, because we know in these kind of diagrams, we see boxes, we see lines between the boxes, but that really doesn't capture the whole story. And there's natural questions which occur, such as, well, why do we have 2 different boxes instead of 1 box? So I wanted to spend a minute here and just talk about the motivation for this SAP Cloud Application Event Hub specifically. And a lot of this is derived from the desire and the motivation to give you as customers a suite-like experience. And events and event exposure are a part of that suite-like experience. So as a built-in part of the business technology platform, you should have access to all the events, all the content from these SAP Cloud applications, and use it in a consistent way. And that's really the purpose for this SAP Cloud Application Event Hub. So the first 2 points here, the event context from the SAP Cloud applications is available out of the box, and we minimize the configuration and administration of individual applications. So here SAP is doing the heavy lifting for you, and all the applications that you buy and are running are connected to this Event Hub out of the box. We say minimize instead of remove configuration, because we still leave some power with the individual application administrators, but this is more like an opt-in kind of operation they do to enable this channel overall, rather than technical wiring, copy pasting of credentials, turning on topics and queues or event types or anything like this. It's just a sort of opt-in to this BTP native capability to expose my events. Next point here, this is free to use with a BTP license. So this includes BTP EA, CPEA, and pay-as-you-go. There, for free, you get a limit of 75 million transactions per month. If you exceed that limit, the charge is quite nominal anyway. It's just a little over 30 euro cents per block of million transactions. So, again, the motivation here, you should have access to these things, but if you have huge scale scenarios, we do need a little bit of protection eventually. Next point is that this is a serverless offering. So you don't do sizing or capacity planning here. Again, this is just simply saying, here are the events from SAP Cloud. They're available. Use them as you like. And this is very different from those other offerings like the advanced event mesh, where you have a huge degree of flexibility and control to deploy individual event brokers and size the individual event brokers, and they're all networked together. So very powerful paradigm, but a very different. So here we have this kind of serverless platform exposure of events, the content, if you will. And there you have this platform as a service, powerful capability to deploy a whole network of brokers. So next, centralized governance. If we didn't have this service and you went into every different SAP cloud application and did different configuration in each one, then obviously it's pretty hard to have a holistic understanding of event movement or traffic across your entire landscape. So this, another motivation here is to centralize that governance, pull it into one place, including the visibility of what's happening. So you can see all event traffic across your SAP cloud landscape in one place. Yeah, so that's the background I wanted to cover, the highlights of the SAP event-driven architecture technology strategy. There's a new document which is on the verge of being released now. It's finalized, just isn't out there on the web page. So you'll be able to see some of these ideas in a longer document quite soon here. So I recommend just taking a look at SAP's website, and you'll find that shortly. So next, we'll segue towards the demo here and our real focus of today, the clean core and event-driven extensions. And clean core is something I think probably everyone's heard about quite extensively by now, and I won't do a deep dive on clean core as a whole, but I'll spend just a few sentences. So in the past, the typical approach would be to do heavy customization of your on-premise business applications. That heavy customization comes with a cost. It makes upgrades difficult and can make maintenance difficult. And when we move into a cloud context, that approach no longer makes a lot of sense. It's far more optimal to take a clean core approach where you keep the core of your business application clean. You do, add your special sauce of your business outside of the core. And one of the ways to do this is through event-driven extensions. This is just one approach, of course. There's a lot of other topics related to clean core and a lot of other supporting ideas out there. But with an event-driven approach, you respond to changes in business objects or business processes in an extension application without needing to go in and customize the core. So also to point out here, and I know this has been covered in other Tech Ed and DevTober talks as well, but events themselves are extensible. So you can take, in a lot of cases with the SAP cloud applications, you can take the standard events, you can add some additional fields to them to avoid unnecessary callbacks. You can add some additional header attributes to support filtering based on your own business criteria. This is supported, and this is fully compatible with clean core. This style of extensibility is non-disruptive to upgrades. You can still upgrade on the regular cadence and take advantage of all of SAP's innovations and all the efforts in security and compliance and so on. Last point here is if you want to go take a look and see what business events are available already from SAP, you can look at this SAP Business Accelerator Hub. There you'll see documentation of all the APIs and events and other things as well, but that the SAP Cloud applications are supporting. So how do you build one of these extensions? And here, SAP offers the Cloud Application Programming Model, CAP. Probably, again, most people are familiar, but in case you're not, this is a framework for building enterprise-grade applications on BTP runtimes. And what's new here, and what are we covering today, is that CAP is released an SAP Cloud Application Event Hub plugin. So this is letting you develop in, as we say here, the well-known CAP messaging paradigms. And then through configuration, you say, use the SAP Cloud Application Event Hub as the source of my SAP business events, which are then triggering responses in my extension application. Again, without having to touch the core business applications, apart from that kind of opt-in, turn-on step I mentioned earlier. And then before we dive into the demo, I just want to walk through a few other concepts that will help you understand what's going on in some parts of the demo. So first, we'll talk some about system landscape and formations. So here's a key point to understand is that the SAP Cloud Application Event Hub is moving events between systems in your system landscape. So system here is synonymous with application tenant. And in the orange box, we can see a screenshot from the BTP cockpit where we see some systems inside of the system landscape. This system type I have selected is an SAP BTP application. So a CAP application, if you will. And my point in saying this or explaining this is to differentiate from other approaches out there. You may get a topic endpoint or a queue endpoint, and you may get a client with some technical access to that topic or queue, and then you can run that client anywhere. It's kind of disembodied from the landscape. It's really a kind of technical access to the events. We take a different concept here with this Event Hub capability where we always know the context of the business applications. We always know the context of your SAP system landscape. This is fundamentally built into the processing. So next, you have some systems in your system landscape. Now, how do you start working with them? First, we need to group them together into a formation. Formation is just another name for this grouping, and the formation has a type saying what its purpose is. So you can think of this as a kind of first authorization to say, I am allowing that subscriptions may be created between systems in this grouping. It's not automatically saying, all data is flowing everywhere or anything like that. It's simply saying now subscriptions can be created for these systems. And usage here is typically, the most basic case is production systems are in one formation, test systems are in another formation, but we see out there lots of other scenarios like lines of business administering their own event flows separately, regions working independently from other regions. There are lots of use cases out there. This is just a tool. And then last slide before we head into the demo, some other aspects of this centralized governance and how this actually works. So once you've created a formation, the next step is the integration administrator needs to go in and actually enable some of the available subscriptions. So here we see in the green box this SAP Cloud Application Event Hub UI, and we see one subscription enabled. And in this sample formation, there happened to only be one available subscription. And we can see on the right there some information about it, what event types are involved, what publisher system it's coming from, what consumer system or subscriber system it's going to, and then you see the option of adding additional event filters. So if you need to further restrict the flow of events inside of this subscription based on some other business context, like only a certain set of cost centers is of interest or certain regions of data, you can add some event filters over there. And then the last thing here that I explain is about integration dependencies. And this is one of the ways that available subscriptions appear in that list, which the integration admin can enable. So, as already mentioned, SAP provides some SAP to SAP scenario support. If there are any scenarios for applications which you put in a formation, you would see automatically in available subscriptions a list of available SAP to SAP scenarios, which you can enable. But for other systems, they can declare these integration dependencies, and they state what event types that system can consume. So we see an example here in the pink box of adding an integration dependency saying, this system can consume events from S4, and they can consume these purchase order created events. And you can note here that this isn't specific to, one individual S4 tenant. This is just saying a general knowledge, what type of events can be processed. Then it would go back to the integration administrator where they can see an available subscription for this integration dependency, which they can then enable and still retain control over the flow of events. And if you happen to have many S4 tenants inside of the same formation, the integration administrator has control and ability to say, which S4 tenant or multiple of them are participating here. It's not a blanket statement saying all events from S4 automatically go somewhere. The integration administrator really retains that fine-grained control over the flow of events. So hopefully that's enough context for the demo. And we can take a minute here if, Antonio, if you see any pressing questions we want to address.
No pressing questions so far. Yeah, no questions so far. So
good, then
thank you,
I'll hand
Greg.
it over to David. Please take it away.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Davey. Hey, everybody. So I hope you can see my screen in a second. Okay.
Yeah, we can see it.
Perfect. So I'm going to do a demo to see all this live in action with a real application, which we're going to build from scratch using the CAP framework. And what I want to build is relatively simple. So I want to build a CAP application which consumes event from S/4HANA, the business partner changed event to be precise. And of course, I want to do this via the SAP Cloud Application Event Hub. And what happens under the hood is that the Event Hub will eventually send messages via HTTP to the CAP application, where we receive them and we want to store them in our own database table. So I'm here in an empty directory. We start completely from scratch using the cds init command, which bootstraps just a bunch of empty folders, basically, so there's nothing in it. And what we want to do first is to create an entity. So we create our schema, and we say namespace DB. And now we can create an entity called received business partners. And they have a UID key, and they have the business partner ID, which we will get from the event later on. You will see that. And what we also want to do, we want to expose it in a service. So we create a service.cs file. And in here, we are using the DB name scheme from our schema CDS file. And we can create our own service called BP, for example, where, thank you, Copilot, we have an entity received business partners, which is just a projection on DB received business partners. All right, so now we already have an OData service with CAP. So I can run CDS watch, and you can see I have an OData service, which is just exposing this received business partner entity. But there's, of course, no data in it because we haven't received any events. So let's handle those events. Now, if you want to receive events, your first destination should be the SAP Business Accelerator Hub, where you can find a list of all those events. In this case, we're interested in the S/4HANA public cloud. And now I click here on events, and I can search for business partners. And you can see the business partner events. Now, you can also look at them and get more information. But what's nice about this is that you can also download the API, the event specification in JSON format, which I've downloaded before. And you can import this into your own CAP application. So I write cds import, provide a link to the file. And this --scds is a bit optional, which allows you to create a CDS model instead of a season model, which is a bit easier to read, but it doesn't matter so much. So once you import it, all the heavy lifting is done. And you can see in your package.json that there's now a new entry in the CDS requires section referencing this imported API definitions. So it's called SAP S4 and so on, business partner. That's basically the service. And also a model is attached. And this is the imported model with all those event definitions you just downloaded. Now, you might be wondering why this is of kind OData and not events or something like this. This is because in CAP, we usually combine the synchronous and asynchronous APIs into one external service. It's just a bit nicer to group them together. In this case, it, of course, only includes events. So the protocol for the synchronous requests doesn't really matter so much. We just chose OData as a default, but don't let that distract you. Now, the other thing this cds import command did was to create this external model, which is referenced in this external service. And here you can see all those different event definitions, which you downloaded. Especially important is this one, business partner changed, which contains the payload business partner, which is a large string. All right, Now, one important thing to note, if you just use this model, then you basically tell us that all the events which are declared in this model are used statically. So in case you're only interested in a few, you can also create your own model and create your own external service and only reference the events you're actually interested in. You can also use projection techniques, but for now, we'll just leave it like that to keep it as simple as possible. Now, what we need to do is we have to implement the logic that once an event flows in, that we store it into our received business partners database table. So let's do this. In CAP, you can just create a JS file next to your CDS file. And here you can just export an asynchronous function. And here you can now get a hook to your business partner service using await TDS connect to. And now let me just split the package.json because I need to copy this identifier for this application. So let's do this. And now you can register an on handler for this event. So we can write on. And now you need to find the event name. So let's again check the external model for all the events. And this is the service name, and all those events which start with this service name are belonging to this service. It's a bit weirdly organized, but the real event name is here change.v1. Okay, so let's just copy this one here and use it as our event identifier. And now we can register an async callback function to do whatever we want to do. So for example, we can just say we log it. So received event message. And we can now also write this message data into our database table. So we can say await insert using the CAP API into this received business partner database table. Our entry is this message.data, which contains the business partner key. And that's all we need to do. Now, as you saw in the graph, those business partner changed events via Event Hub are later on emitted with HTTP. But if you develop locally, it's not so easy to make Event Hub publish the events to your local machine because you would need to expose it on the internet, which we don't want to do here. But in CAP, you can also just mock it, and that's exactly what we're going to do. So if you want to test your application, you can just create a new folder test and say you want to test your BP implementation. So we create a new file, BP test.js, in this test folder. And here we can say we require our CDS package. And now we can run CDS tests. So this function basically bootstraps a nice testing environment of the application. So you kind of have your application available. So you can send HTTP requests and whatever you want to do. So that's quite nice. And now we can just say we can receive events. Okay, just some simple test. Now again, we take our hook to our business partner service. So we again write await TDS connect to, and now this string, which I always forget. So let me just copy it. And once we have this hook, we can now fake an emit of an event to the system. So we can just write await bp.emit changed v1. And as a data, we just say the business partner ABC is now flowing in. Okay, that's just some sample message we want to induce into our system. Now, once this message comes in, according to the logic which we've previously written, a respective database entry shall be written in our database. So let's just select the entries. So again, we can use the CAP API to select from our received business partners. And now we expect that the length is 1, and we expect that the first element business partner shall be ABC. Okay? That's all you need to do to test your application. Now let's, before we run it, we also have to put an npm install in there to install the CDS dependency. So it's installed, and now if I run it, for example, using chest, then hopefully everything's green. If not, I made some mistake, but let's see. Yeah, so the test passed, so that's how we would test our application. Now, I haven't enabled anything with respect to Event Hub yet, so now that's what we're gonna do. First thing you have to do is install the CapJS Event Broker plugin. By the way, the reason why it's still called Event Broker here is because it's the technical name, and at Cap we stick to the technical name, which is usually immutable, so you don't need to change it all the time. So just stick to Event Broker. This is the first messaging implementation which we did not implement inside the core SAP CDS package, but in an open source plugin package. So you can see it here. It's an open source package on public GitHub. It gives you also a bit of documentation on how to use it, and that's what you would need to install. Now, the other thing you need to do is to enable it in your configuration. So what we always like to do in production is to use a production profile, because locally it's just easier to handle this local messaging instead of Event Hub, because you don't have this public endpoint. So in this production environment, we can do this with this production profile. We want to have a messaging service of kind event broker. Yeah. And the other thing which is needed in production, because those Event Hub messages come in via HTTP, and not everybody shall be allowed to access this endpoint. Only Event Hub is allowed to publish events. You also have to secure your application. So also in production, we use an auth service of kind IAS. And this IAS, not IAS, it's identity. And this identity service is important. You might still use Access UA. That's also totally fine, as long as you have an additional identity service bound to your application. So this is important that you have this service attached to your CAP application. And that's basically what you need to do. And now we can deploy it. Now, I'm not going to deploy it manually here in front of you because it takes a few minutes. I just referred to the documentation. So in Node.js services, you can go to messaging service. And here you have this new section, SAP Cloud Application Event Hub, which again tells you exactly what you need to do, what you need to install, how you need to configure it. And it also gives you some guidance on how you deploy it. Now it's a bit cumbersome because you have to really make sure that you do it right here. For example, the identity service, to authenticate the incoming request, needs to be configured in a way that the Event Broker instance is allowed to send HTTP requests to your application. So you have to add them into this consumed services section. But I promise you, as long as you adhere to this example and adapt it to your application, everything is going to be fine, and you will be able to deploy it, and it should also work. Important to note is that in the Event Broker configuration, you also need to provide a so-called system namespace. This is specific to your application, right? You can think of a nice name, and you have to provide the webhook URL, which by default is exactly this one. You can also configure it if you want to have another endpoint, but just stick to the default. It's always nice. Okay, now once you deploy it with the usual techniques, MBT deploy, then let's just sign in. Then you will have a running application, which I will show you here. So this is the deployed application, which I deployed before. Now, what's left to do? There's still no events flowing because as of now, you haven't configured any, let's say, formation or group of systems where you want to connect this app to. So for this to work, you go to your global account where your app is running, and you click on System Landscape. And here it's important that the CAP application, which you have just deployed, also exists as a system. Yeah? So you can just click Add System, give a name, and system type would be SAP BTP application. Done that already. And it's this one here. So that's basically a few things you have to enter here. System namespace being the important one. That should be the same one which you used in your deployment. Now, what you also have to do, which we will automate in the future, is so-called integration dependencies, which Davey also mentioned before. So this is just a fancy name of saying what events do you want to consume. Now, in this case, we want to consume those business partner changed events. So you write that into this integration dependency, and then we all know which events you actually want to consume from another system. Now, the other thing you have to do is to register your S/4HANA system. I also did that. So this is the SAP S/4HANA Cloud system I want to receive events from. And it also shows you, by the way, here what the capabilities of this cloud S/4HANA Cloud system are, which APIs exist, and yeah, also which events exist. You can see it's quite a lot of stuff. And now once you have this, you can now create a so-called formation. So you click here on formations, and now you have to bring all those systems together, because at the moment they just exist as standalone systems, but now you have to group them into one formation. So I also did that. It's just a few clicks where you select the systems. And what you need to put in there is, of course, the CAP application, which we've just developed. Also the SAP S/4HANA Cloud system, where we want to receive events from. And in addition to that, also the SAP Cloud Application Event Hub, system type SAP Event Broker, which you use to receive events. Once this is ready, there's one final thing you have to do for the events to actually flow. And for that, you have to go into this application of Event Broker, Cloud Application Event Hub. And you have to press one button to enable the flow, because now all the pipes are set up. Everybody knows what they need to do, basically, but you have to click on enable to actually make those events flow. So this button here, which I already enabled, you have to click it, and then everything's green and the events start flowing. And to show you that they are actually flowing, I'm gonna now run logs of my deployed CAP application. So now whenever an event comes in, I should see some log here. Now I go into my S/4HANA Cloud system and open the business partner app. I click on edit. And now I do some change. And as you know, whenever a business partner is changed, this event will flow. And I just change some field, doesn't matter what I do. I click on save. All right. And now if I patiently wait a few seconds, then I will hopefully see that this event is now coming into my deployed CAP application, of which I can see the logs here. Yeah, here it is. So you could see the received event, and now it's also stored in my database table. And with that, I conclude my demo, and I hope you have a lot of questions for us. Thank you.
Wow, that was a very impressive live coding exercise. That was fantastic. So unfortunately, we don't have that many questions, honestly. We only have one question, which yeah, well, I'll just ask it, and then you guys can answer back. So the question is, how can we use principal propagation with events?
So here, typically, we do not. So the user context is not associated with the event unless it's, specific to the payload of one individual event type. So generally here, this is more of a notification that something has changed in a business object or business process. It's not a direct chain of, users doing an action through multiple systems. So, typically principal propagation is not relevant here, but sometimes in the payload of an individual event type, there may be a field which says which user made the change, but something a bit different, but that's as close as it comes.
Yeah, it's also reflected in the CAP framework. So usually when, let's say, an HTTP request comes in, there's usually a user attached to it. So if you write cds.context.user, you will see the user information. You can do some authentication, authorization checks and what you want to do. But for events, that's not really the case, as David just said. So you will have only one user in CAP, which is the privileged user, which is able to do everything because it's a system-to-system communication. And it's also not that you can, I don't know, if something's not authorized to do something, you cannot call back to the user and respond to whoever emitted the event. The event is just there. They don't even know that you received the events in many cases. So yeah, that's a big difference to synchronous requests.
Cool. Thank you for that. Now, I do have a question. So if you don't mind me asking a question also. So we've seen how a CAP application can easily consume cloud events basically via the SAP Cloud Application Event Hub, right? But what about producing events that will end up going to the service?
Yeah, maybe probably we both could talk about this one as well. But so currently, what we actually have, we use CAP internally at SAP in similar ways that customers use CAP. But some things don't always roll out at the same time based on the services. So internally at SAP, we have CAP applications which produce and consume events. That's already supported. There were a couple other things needed before customer-built extensions can produce events into the SAP Cloud Application Event Hub. So it's not there as of today, but it's also coming.
Okay. Cool. Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing how you can end up producing events, right? Like in the end, that's the thing. Like CAP application can also produce events. And yeah, it would be interesting to see it actually going to SAP Cloud Application Event Hub. Now, and I also have another question about monitoring events. So you mentioned a bit about governance, right? But then, like, what about a failure scenario? So, for example, like, obviously, like, Cloud Application Event Hub will, like, my understanding is that it will send these events via HTTP, for example, to a CAP application. But let's assume that CAP application is down for an hour, worst case scenario, for example. So how would you manage that? How do you handle that failure scenario? And where can I see those failures as well?
Yep, absolutely. So here we leverage another part of the SAP Cloud ecosystem. So CALM, Cloud Application Lifecycle Management. So SAP Cloud Application Event Hub is integrated there. One of the pieces of information that we pipe over are failed events. So we try this exponential retry with backoff to try to deliver events. And if everything is failing for some unknown reason at the end of that, then we, internally more or less put it in a dead letter queue and then send it to Calm. So, as a customer, you can go into your Calm tenant and take a look and see every individual event which has failed and then take appropriate mitigating actions. And we also have some overall health monitoring, which is releasing to customers very shortly here as well, where you'll be able to in Calm see some overall health and information about what's going on in your event movement across your landscape as well. So more information is coming there kind of rapidly as we speak. And then there's another. Go ahead.
Sorry. Okay. And to add to this, so you also asked about what happens if Event Hub is not there. So the moment we support also emitting events to Cloud Application Event Hub for single tenant applications, we also have a feature called the outbox. So what happens is if for whatever reason we cannot actually send the event to Event Hub or Event Mesh or whatnot, then we store it safely in our own database table together with the maintenance action of whatever is going on from a business logic perspective. And once it's written there, we continuously process this table and try to emit it again and again. And we also have an exponential backoff. So if it cannot be delivered the second time, we just wait a bit longer, maybe the third time, maybe the fourth time. And so also here we have some resilience. And if for whatever reason it can never be delivered because something's gone horribly wrong, you still have it in your database table, so no information is lost.
Okay, interesting. And as a developer, I don't need to worry about it then. It's something that CAP handles it on my behalf.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I mean, you have to enable it once. That's what you have to do, and you should also have a look at this outbox table that there are no messages who don't vanish. But apart from that, it's all handled by CAP. Yeah.
Nice.
And one other interesting feature which is coming up, which is we have kind of built internally, but not released to customers as well. So we're also going to put in customers' hands ability to replay events. So, internally, we have these events retained for 5 days inside of an event log, which we're, operating and is working behind the scenes. We're going to give customers access to where they will be able to trigger a replay themselves. So they can say anywhere within that retention period, let me go back in time and start resending everything from an hour ago, a day ago, 3 days ago, will be something in their control and available. So, another exciting thing coming up here shortly.
The resilience is a very, very important topic with asynchronous communication because, for synchronous events, you just say, okay, error 500, try again, or I don't know what. But for those system-to-system communications, you don't have a user in front of the computer checking everything, right? So we have to make sure that everything is resilient. This is a very important property.
Nice. That's good to know. There are 2 questions now on the chat, so let's address this, and then we wrap up. So, is there any mission available on SAP Discovery Center for this? For I imagine SAP Cloud Application Event Hub and CAP that you know of? No.
So I
No.
don't think there's a mission because it's
Yeah.
so brand new, right? We just
Exactly.
finished it the other day. But there are sample applications online. If you check out Capire, our CAP documentation, you will really see a guide on how to do it. What I basically did in front of you explains step by step, so you can just follow the documentation and write me up in case you're stuck.
Yeah. I've seen that application is related to incident management, something like that,
Right,
right?
exactly.
Yeah. So if you go to GitHub, you'll be able to find it on how to basically get going, connecting and all the different components that Davey just show us. And the other one is, will this work for on-prem S4 systems?
Yeah, so here, when it comes to the SAP Cloud Application Event Hub, it does not and will not connect directly to on-prem systems. So you need to add something from the integration suite into the mix typically to integrate your on-prem systems. So to differentiate, just to make sure it's clear, as for Private Cloud Edition, so any of these RISE private cloud things, these are included with the SAP Cloud Application Event Hub usage and will be available there, but the true on-prem is not.
Yeah, so an on-prem that I self-host, then that would not be, or maybe I have it in AWS, for example, running it there on Azure or something. That will not be possible to connect, right? Okay, cool. That's good to know. Good to know. Yeah, and those are all the questions that we have. So yeah, I just basically want to thank both of you, Davey and David, for delivering this fantastic session, for sharing your knowledge and expertise as part of the session. I don't know if you want to add anything else.
Just to thank you and to say, if you download the slide decks, there's some emails in there. So, reach out if you have some interesting things to discuss. We're available. And yeah, thanks for watching.
Excellent.
Yeah, thanks for watching.
Excellent. And the slides were shared over chat. They're also available in the video description and even in the SAP community event if you're watching it through the SAP community event. And well, also, I want to thank the viewer for joining the live event. We had quite a few concurrent viewers there, so that's good. Or if you're watching the recording, this sort of recordings do have a long lifespan. And it is possible that we will have, I don't know, people watching in 10 months' time, something like that. So, and a quick reminder that there is plenty for everyone to learn during the Tourfest. So make sure to check out all the sessions that are part of the event. And with that, thank you. Thanks for joining. Bye. That is a wrap. So thank you very much for